unincorporated areas, but the growth numbers with regards to permitting does not. Only includes the unincorporated, but not the incorporated area. Right now, we're about an average 5.5 million gallons from our friends at Savannah Water and Sewer providing water for us. And our current wastewater treatment plant is built to handle 1 million gallons today, but it is currently limited to 500,000 based on our discharge capacity. And we're looking to expand our spray field capacity to 1 million gallons today to bring it up to a capacity. And we just recently awarded the design of our expansion to bring it to 3 million gallons per day. Transportation, so 952 linear miles of multi-lane roads that we have to maintain. We are lucky to be a very rail-rich, dual-rail county. 69 miles of commercial freight rail between Charleston Southern, CSX, and Norfolk Southern. Thank you. So with those mileage, this is what causes the problem. As anywhere else, your roads are rarely at capacity with the exception of 3 hours a day, and that's what we're seeing. Out of the 30,000 total workforce, 31,000 total workforce we have, about a third of them work within Effingham County. Half of them work in Chatham County. And then the remainder are spread out around the surrounding counties. So that creates congestion, obviously, on the north-south routes going into and from Chatham every day. We are predominantly agricultural county still, even with our growth, where if you were to take our agricultural designated land and our conservation land, it would be approximately, what are we at, 26, about 1/10. It's about 10 times larger than our commercial, industrial, and residential when you add them together. And so how are we responding to this growth? And I'll just go over these really quickly. This is the page I wanted to go to. So transportation infrastructure plan, the board contracted that. We have completed it, and we're implementing it, mostly funded through T-SPLOS, but also through LMEG funding and SPLOST funding. We've completed all of our standard hot mix repaving as a result of T-SPLOST, and we're on to the full depth reclamation of the ash roads starting next Monday. And then on the capacity issues, the big project was the Effingham Parkway, which is obviously going full steam ahead with the completion estimated in 2025, and a widening of Goshen Road, as well as increasing the capacity in a lot of our major intersections. Water and sewer reuse master plan, that is underway, but just because it's underway does not mean we're not moving forward with the stuff that we know we have to get done, that we don't need a plan to tell us. As we mentioned, that includes the wastewater treatment plant expansion, the spray field expansion, as well as the water line expansions with, if you recall, the Loop A and Loop B projects. Loop A is complete. Loop B is about to go out for bid. Is that right, Eric? Yes. And so stormwater utility master plan, we did a feasibility study. That's generally the prerequisite for the master plan. We got a grant to pay for about half of the master plan. You all awarded it to Pond, and that is underway. Facility condition utilization master plan awarded and complete, and we're utilizing our SPLOST funds to start the implementation of that. Parks facility master plan, again, that was awarded to Pond. It's underway. We've already had community meetings on it. Solid waste master plan is complete. And this is one of the items that the chairman mentioned, that we got some information from the last meeting. We thought it was a good idea, and we are looking to implement it. And that was, particularly was the green space master plan that we were asked to look into. But we've also discovered that we really need not just a green space, a greenway, a corridor plan for bicycle, pedestrian, and green space. So we're looking at getting a grant to fund that, and I think that application is in a few months. Land use and zoning code modernization, which is really part of this meeting. That was awarded to SME. That is underway, and they are also working with us to implement the comprehensive plan update. Again, all of those components, master plans, are basically, that information is used to update our comp plan, so that we have a document that we can actually use. But that's where we stand. One of the things that also came out of our last meeting was a problem that we weren't aware of, and that is that we are growing. We're getting a lot of new home construction, but several of those neighborhoods are being bought out before they're finished, and therefore the houses are not making it to the market. And there was concern by some of the participants last time with regards to these build to rent communities, single family home communities, and how some of our neighboring areas, our metropolitan areas, are dealing with it. After that meeting, we did some research. It has become a big problem up in the Charlotte area, and it's becoming a very active market here for that, and essentially a lot of it has to do with there isn't a large availability of apartments or rentals, and so to fill that gap, a lot of these hedge funds and real estate investment trusts are buying out pre-approved residential neighborhoods and then renting and then putting them on those homes on the market for rent. So not to disrupt the housing market too much, we wanted to see if we can come up with some reasonable ways to monitor it and prevent all the housing stock from being absorbed by these large hedge funds and making home ownership not affordable anymore. Our consultant looked at what some other entities were doing, and I think we looked at Savannah, we looked at Clayton County, and we also looked at Cherokee County for some possibilities. Do you have one?
Last one.
And so that's the handout that I gave you all, was really the result of some of that work. And I'll hand this over to Eric, unless you all want to kind of respond to all of that data I just provided you.
Does anyone on the board have any questions at this point about the data shared? Okay, Mr. Eric?
Well, hold on. The firm SME, are they going to be giving us recommendations on the land use
Yes.
as well? Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, so they've and what has happened and this is a case as we come up with our code modernization, it was a long process. I think grand total it was about 18 months that we put aside for that, but we realized that there are things that cannot wait for 18 months, and so when it came to the R6 and R3 zoning requirements, neighborhood requirements, we wanted them to take a look at those quickly, so I asked them to look at that, come back with recommendations out of order so we can approve those while they continue to work on the project. And it's the same thing we've asked them to do with these rental communities, so we can come up with some proposals while they're working on the big fix modernization of the entire code. So that's kind of where we are on here, and we figured it'd be a good opportunity since it was brought up at this meeting to kind of discuss what we've discovered that other jurisdictions are doing and put potential some recommendations on what we can do, where we're not essentially crushing that opportunity, because we do realize that there's a demand for rental single-family housing, but because they are so well funded, it takes opportunities away from workforce housing, folks that want to own, how we can just keep an eye on it and make sure it just doesn't get out of hand. Okay. Okay. All right.
So you have two documents in front of you. One's a memo from SM&E, and the other starts with Article 2 definitions at the very top. These are two documents, and Tim's pulling them up to put them on the screen. I don't have a PowerPoint. But he'll pull the Word documents up to kind of go through. I'll start with the memo from SM&E, and it is the discussion of the rental regulations, and I am not going to read it word for word to you.
Thank you.
But what they did is they looked at other communities to see what they were doing for long-term and short-term rentals, to kind of get some ideas of what we might implement here in Effingham County to address the concern about these rental communities, as Tim was just pointing out. So as you go through here, you'll see that background. They checked Cherokee County, and just to highlight some of the things that Cherokee County has, they have an ordinance in place, and the key takeaways from their ordinance is that they have defined which zoning districts they will allow these mass rental communities. That's not the term I need to be using. I need to be using the right term.
Or
A
rent
planned
communities.
single-family home community that is planned in the form of rental. So Cherokee has where they've defined the districts in which they'll allow, and they've put a maximum cap on the percent of the units that could be owned for or rental units versus ownership.
Is it in, per neighborhood or per homes built? I mean, is it like 10% of the neighborhood, or like this one, there's 1,000 homes built, 100 of them in this neighborhood can be rental, or is it scattered throughout these neighborhoods?
It's a per neighborhood.
They use the term
Per neighborhood?
community, so it'd be
Yeah.
Okay.
per neighborhood,
Development,
per
mm.
project. Yeah. Clayton County is the next one they looked at. Clayton County, these get a little bit more sophisticated as you move down. They have ordinances in place to track the rental communities. They put that in their subdivision regulations and codified it. They have requirements that you indicate that these are gonna be rental units on your plats. And they require licensing with the county. So they have an entire program where they license these communities and regulate these communities, and they're required to indicate that as part of the platting, the creation of the subdivision. The next one, Tim's mentioned City of Savannah. They do not regulate long-term rentals, but they do have the short-term rental program, and they're similar to Cherokee in the fact that they have determined what percent or the maximum number of units per, in the case of Savannah Ward, they have an overlay district of which areas will be allowed to have these short-term rentals. And again, Savannah destination community, they are more about the short-term rental, the weekend stays, the week-long stays. And so they've got an overlay district that identifies different areas that this is allowed in, and they do regulate this by a registration. They require people to register and report that they have these, and they have a maximum capacity per district that they follow. Interesting, in the key takeaways you'll see is they have basically an entire department that handles this, because they have a customer service process for notification of complaints, a complaint response period, a tracking system of all these properties, so that their staff can respond to the community concerns that may arise from short-term rentals. Glenn County is the fourth one they looked at. They do not have a long-term rental program, but they do short-term rental, and it is similar to what we've discussed in a couple of the others. They have a compliance department. They actually contract out their compliance for this. They have a certification. They call it certification, but it's really a registration process. And they do that, and interesting here in the middle of the paragraph, they are doing this because they're interested in those accommodation taxes. they use this as a mechanism to charge and track lodging taxes or accommodation excise taxes. City of Atlanta also does
So,
not.
Eric, they've really done this more just to capture revenues from taxes for the ones who are doing it for short term.
it
They haven't
appears.
done it for the opportunity to control this type of property within their
Right.
borders, which would be the long term.
Yeah, Glenn County appears to be more geared towards
Vacations
the,
and, you know, rental.
yeah,
Well, I mean, that's what they're. we're
keeping
not
track
gonna-
of and wanting
I
it
can't
and
imagine
getting
we
the
would have
taxes.
But I'll say, one of the things that you can use the structure that these entities have created for short-term rentals as the basis on how you would regulate long-term, because one of the struggles that when we've looked at these is you can tell folks, yeah, you can only have 10%, but how do you regulate it? And so, places like Savannah, they've done it for short-term rentals, but they could easily just do it for long-term rentals too, if they so choose. The same system where you have to actually go in there and register that you are renting the property. Cherokee does it a little bit differently, where they're going to be really doing it on anything that's newly zoned. So you're registering your neighborhood, and you have to do it on an annual basis. Your homeowners association has to register with the county, and one of those requirements is they have to enforce the 10%, no more than 10% rentals for the neighborhoods. So the issue is what you're trying to accomplish, and then how you actually enforce it, and the latter is the more complicated.
So what happens if we don't pass anything before the pending legislation gets passed in Atlanta? So do we need to pass it beforehand, or once we pass it, does it get erased once that
Yes.
legislation passes, or is that just you can't pass new ordinances going forward?
I think generally it's going to be the former, where is that they create generally and I haven't read the full law that they're talking about, but generally it's to negate any local regulation of rent to or build to rent properties or long-term rentals or something to that effect.
So there's a chance, we
We could go through all
won't be,
this and
we won't be
get
able to
negated.
do anything, yeah.
Yeah. That's right.
Just to finish up this memo, then City of Atlanta is very similar to the others. They have the licensing program, they have the enforcement program, customer service aspect to it. And then, as just mentioned, SM&E finished up with just a comment that there is the pending litigation in the state Senate and House concerning this, and they're just pointing out that action is out there pending, trying to curtail local communities from doing exactly what these other communities have done. So. The next document, just real quickly, is the draft. This is unvetted with the public. We haven't gone through the public open house for the changes to the zoning ordinance that we mentioned that SM&E will be doing for us in the future. But it is the draft proposed by SM&E for discussion tonight of how we might change our multifamily zoning districts to address the planned single-family home community, which is predominantly lease. So you see that on the definitions. We added that definition to explain exactly what we're referring to. And the approach that's been taken on here it's a combination of doing the registration, but it's also an attempt to raise the bar on the quality of the development. And there's going to be graphics associated with this that would be incorporated into the final draft. But there's been, if you look at that paragraph in Article 3, 5614, it talks about facade and varying the facade. So they're making an attempt, and this will be supplemented with graphics, as I said, to if this kind of development is going to occur, such as attached townhomes, that there would be an architectural standard that we could apply that would improve the look of the facility from the outside. And you'll see in here this percent of lot coverage and the amount of square footage that would be considered private yard for each of these units. So there's an attempt here to try to limit the density so that each unit has its own private space, and then there's plenty of open spaces we've already adopted. And the building doesn't look like a big giant vinyl box, to be
Right,
honest.
that's, yeah.
Access control, the number of access points, it was also suggested in here for developments that get high density. They have multiple ingress and egress onto state roads and county roads. And then not a lot has changed in the rest of the section for R3 and R6. When you get to the end of, towards the end of R6, there is a several subsections of a planned single-family home community. And again, it talks about the registering with the county and having a management company or a viable association to manage this rental, so that we have a point of contact and someone that we can regulate this program through, limiting on the duration of the minimum duration of a lease. Again, another comment about the facade, and then on E, in E and F, you see those same comments again, those same requirements about decorative elements and lot coverage and open space, exterior open space.
One of the things I read about these communities that they've had problems with was the management companies were not even co-located, not even in the county. So some group could own it here and be in Ohio, and you're calling somebody up there. I think if there's any way we can, there needs to be a management company in county or on site or locally that we can deal with, instead of some out of state, out of county management type team. I don't know where I read that, but that was an issue that they couldn't,
Gotcha.
they weren't reactive to the problems.
That's really, again, I wasn't gonna read it word for word to you, but you have those hard copies, and we can definitely email out the Word file if we need to.
And we are kind of trying to take what little information that, you know, we've got from our last meetings and individual discussions with you all, and try and put them in a document. So we don't expect it to be right, which is one of the purposes of this meeting, is that we can actually get feedback on it and then come back to you maybe when we do our workshop.
Well, I think Forrest brings up a good point. So if this legislation goes through, and I guess we'll have to figure out, read it word for word, and not sure if we'd be able to understand it then, the way the attorneys write it up. But, you know, if we're complying, we're not saying they can't come, but can we put a condition on there like what Forrest said with, hey, you need somebody locally here?
That's right, and that's my
mean-
thought is that they'll probably, they don't want to make it too broad with regards to, you can't put any sort of conditions or requirements on these. Obviously, but you can't just say you can't have them. You can't outlaw them.
Right.
It'll be somewhere in between, and so we've got to kind of see. And my guess is that there's going to be some debate on the changing of this ordinance.
I think the architectural restrictions are a great idea, with maybe 4 units per building or something. If you go over to Pooler and ride down Boulevard, it's literally a half mile of vinyl with just black doors. It's ridiculous. We don't want that up here, I'm telling you. That dense. I mean, 4 buildings or 4 units per building, and then a space. Something like that, I think, could turn out to be something nice. But these literally looks like a vinyl warehouse.
Yeah, well, I'm equally concerned about the small houses. They're throwing a small house. I mean, I lived in a small house for many, many years, and that's fine. But if it's all rental, like, you know, 400 or 500 rental units, and the management company is in Ohio,
Yeah, that's,
and people are not maintaining it, and you got it maybe next to another residential unit, I don't know what the legislature's gonna do with, or the court's gonna do with this suit, but that's our concern, is that it hurts our real estate agents, the market. They have nothing to sell. It hurts our folks as we grow, can't own a home because everything's being sucked up for rental. And then if it's managed outside the county, we can't control the quality of the growth. And so gonna have to read this very carefully, but that's what we're faced with, and we're looking at, how do we put some brakes on that and control this growth and protect our businesses here and our residents? I don't
A
know.
lot of our real estate agents, I mean, they have property management businesses, but see, they're getting cut out altogether because they're being rented, nothing to sell, and then there's nothing to property manage because it's somebody out of state, like Boris is saying.
And these companies can put, you know, if Ashley had 3 or 4 homes that he had an agent renting for him, they can put him out of business because they got just bought 200 homes that they can lower the rents until you can't afford to rent. You got to sell. You know, just, I don't know where this case is going to go, but anyway, maybe some of you guys might help us with some ideas that we can research. We're looking into that to see how to control it.
One thing that I've heard, and I don't know that there's anything we can do on like existing neighborhoods that they're selling in to help protect some of the people that own homes in there, because I've heard of people that their whole street, all but 2 or 3 are now rental by
Yeah,
a
that was a
large
problem in
company,
North
you know.
Carolina. I think it was in North Carolina. I read an article. I think, Tim, you forwarded that.
That's right.
And they started regulating only 10% of the homes because the house would come up for sale. These REITs would come in and pick up these houses all through the neighborhood. As they came available.
I don't have a problem with it. I think it just needs to be managed and
That's the key. How can
through
we,
zoning or whatever to,
how can we put management controls on it? I don't know.
you know.
But I guess part of this document will help us look to that. Anything else?
No, sir.
All right.
And just briefly, that, you know, the topic of buffers did come up on Tuesday. That is something I think we're bringing up on August 2nd at a 4 o'clock meeting. And there's just varying things we want to discuss on that, and, you know, potentially looking at a berm buffer formula, basically giving you credit for your buffer space by putting in a berm. And then I will tell you, our buffer table is very confusing, whereas it's based on a combination of use and zoning, where I think it would be clearer for everybody if the buffer tables were just based on the current zoning of the property. So there are a couple of things we're looking at there, and this is really based on feedback and kind of issues that have come up over time. So this way we can, we won't have to do everything through a variance. We can kind of do things through through ordinance.
And there's a lot of ambiguity of what a buffer is in our
That's right.
ordinance. It's just not clear.
So Alan, I don't know if you're aware, but we are going to do something with the planning board in our August 2nd meeting. We're going to meet an hour early and start with what we've been studying, talk about some buffers and kind of get together. I think it'll help the planning board as they're trying to evaluate. So we're going to be intentional about hitting that too with the growth that we've got. 'Cause we find that we're constantly having to, do we do a variance? Do we not do a variance? Is it a hardship? Why? So hopefully we can resolve a lot of that through some good strategic planning and meeting with you guys. All right, is there anything from the board? I'm going to open it to constituents to share or have questions about anything you've heard tonight, what we're doing in a certain area, or if you've got some ideas or thoughts that we need to be considering. Like I said, I was really excited that we did 3 things from the last meeting that we hadn't even thought about. A green space plan, looking at that. So we're looking for a grant, but if we have to fund it, we'll fund it. I think it's going to be a good thing to control to get the quality growth we want. We learned about rental, buy, built to rent. We didn't even know that was out there, that was hurting our real estate community, so we're trying to hit that. And then passive recreation. I've gotten emails and had a lot of comments last time, so we are looking not only at that green space plan, we're looking at some properties that we have, one of which is the Atlas Reservoir, 238 acre, I'll call it a small lake. And we are trying to get that in a situation where we could have a really nice recreational facility out there with boating and fishing and maybe a beach and I don't know what all. I know that'll make pavilion, and it's just something where it's not ball. You can go out there and have a good time with your family. Looking at, we're going to look at the research will look around the county and see where it should be, but we think Atlas Reservoir is one place. That's at Sand Hill and 80. It's a good location for people who are visiting our community for tourism to go. It's a good place for our constituents to go. Instead of going to the water park at Statesboro, they can go, boat around in a really nice, if we cleaned it up and fixed some campsites, maybe we'll get somebody to draw the plans, what it could look like for some good passive recreational area. So, and it's not next to a residential area, so it wouldn't create a lot of noise and issues for that. So those are 3 things we picked up from our constituents. So I'm gonna open it to if you come to the mic, give us your name and any questions about what we're working on, if you didn't even hear it tonight, or if you got some additional concerns, thoughts, or ideas that we can consider as we, over the next 2 or 3 years, do a better job of working together for quality growth. The mic is yours.
I got a question.
We got one lady that's already started toward them. I'm gonna let the ladies go
Have all
first.
night, so you won't.
I'll go ahead and start.
Mr. Chairman, as she walks up, this is Laura Walker with City of Savannah. And
Okay.
she and I have been talking this week, and she's brought a few
Okay.
colleagues with her, and
Okay, Laura.
welcome, Laura.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this time. I'm going to start by saying that the environmental manager for the Water Resources Department for the City of Savannah, and in that capacity, I have to do a lot of things, but one of the things I get to do is share our water resource story, our water facilities with our public. And it's by far my favorite thing to do, right? You wouldn't believe the people that want to come see I&D, where we treat our region's water. Of course, you have school kids, both public and private. I get homeschool kids. I get groups from our military bases. I get tourists from all over the world, literally, that want to come and tour I&D. So I meet them there. They go through the double doors, and the first thing that they see is a 12-foot tall oak tree made out of paper mache with a sign on it that says, "We love trees." They gather in there or under this tree. The first thing I ask them is, if you had 2 glasses of water in front of you, one of the glasses of water came from a river that was surrounded by a forest. The other glass of water came from a river that was surrounded by a city. Which one would you drink? Y'all don't have to answer, but I know y'all got it right. No matter what age group or where they're from, they always get the answer to that question right. Now, why is that? I think it's almost intuitive. What do y'all think? As we go through the plant, I describe the plant as this big facility that mimics what happens naturally out in a watershed. It just speeds it up a lot. But it's a simple process. That plant is, what, 80 years old, at least? 80 years old, and it is still providing some of the best water in Georgia at some of the best prices. Why is that? I saw that look, but I promise you, if you do some looking around, I promise, you know, I thought long and hard about, well, should I say those words? But it's true, but you know, it's true. It is true. Some of the most affordable water, you know, in Georgia, in the Southeast, and there's lots of documents that'll back me up on that, so that's why I'm saying it. But that plant produces that water, being the age that it is. Why is that? Why is that? So if our group is really lucky and they have time on their hands, I bring them out here to Effingham County. I bring them to Abercorn Creek, and I show them the forest. And I say, the reason why that plant, 80 years old, can still work and supply good water is because of this, the forest that you see around it. So what I'm talking about in really simple terms is source water protection, right? Source water protection is a simple concept. By keeping the land around your water source simple, as in a forest, you are able to provide clean, safe, affordable water to your community that we have for many, many years done. So in 2002, the state of Georgia required all water utilities to create and develop a source water protection plan. So we did that in 2002, and it required us to look at all of our potential sources of pollution around our intake. And so we have a 7-mile radius around the intake that locates potential sources of pollution. And so back in 2002, y'all can just imagine, 7 miles around Abercorn Creek, there were, I could count them on one hand, how many potential sources of pollution were around Abercorn Creek. So the state really didn't give us an idea of when to update that plan, so some time went by, and in 2017, we decided to update that plan. Myself and the consultant doing the plan met with your staff. I don't think any of them are still here, but we met with the engineer at the time and a planner and the county manager at the time and told them, City of Savannah is gonna pay for this plan. We would like to share it with y'all because it's in your jurisdiction.
Our staff
So
has
in
that plan. I don't want to rush you on this, but we want to make sure we hear from our constituents on the local growth. So I know you have some concerns
gonna
about the water
I'm gonna-
source, so if you can narrow that down. 'Cause-
Chuck, yes, sir,
Okay,
I
that'd be
will.
great.
So in 2017, we updated the plan. And when we did that 7-mile radius, there were about 20 sources of potential pollution. All right? We still were at a low level that raised us up to a moderate level of risk for our source water intake. So here recently, we've seen some public notices from the Corps and EPD about plans that y'all are considering for around Abercorn Creek. And so we did a quick assessment, and within a 1-mile radius, we now have 14 potential sources of pollution. That has raised our risk of contaminating all of our drinking water sources from 16% to 76%. So I'm here today very humbly asking this commission to please work with the City of Savannah to protect all of our drinking water source for now and in the future.
Do we get a list of those potential?
Absolutely.
I haven't seen that. I'd be curious. what
Absolutely.
those are.
I am here available to meet with any of y'all to go through this, but we have an opportunity now to protect our drinking water source. It's one that we should do. I don't think anyone would argue with me on that.
No, I agree. If you got that information, and if you say you've been talking with the staff, that's new to me that we had potential.
Y'all actually have source water protection plans. Y'all adopted them in 2012.
Right, we've got some things related to buffers and all kind of things that relate to that. But I didn't know that source was in particular jeopardy. So I'd like to do some follow-up research with our staff, everything you're sharing.
Great.
So it's a good point, that these kind of things give us information about what like we did the other 3 items that we can look into. So we'll check that out.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Didn't mean to make it come a little short, but I
That's
wanna
all right.
make sure we hear from also people in Effingham about their concerns on the growth, but we'll definitely look into that. Mr. Allen, you had something you were going to share or question?
I'm Alan Zipper. I come in and I heard about the rental community thing. I'd never heard that before, about people coming in and buying up large parts of a subdivision. But what went through my mind is we have a lot of people in the county who essentially do the same thing, but they're private individuals. They buy homes out of foreclosure and things like that, and they rent them. So would that 10% include those type people? Would it be a total of 10% of the community?
And I think and this is our first attempt at it, was to look at what gets developed from this point forward. So when someone comes in and asks for a rezoning, let's say to an R6, we add these conditions, or to an R3, which is multifamily. These conditions are then added to that. So for the existing housing stock, I think it becomes very difficult for us to do that. But but that was that's one possibility. I mean, we could technically go into like something like what Savannah did, which is if you're going to rent a house, you have to register with us, and then we can do existing neighborhoods. What we're recommending is that we do anything that's kind of new construction from this point forward as part of the subdivision, as part of the a rezoning subdivision requirement for only for R6 and R3.
So
If that
this-
makes sense.
This would be more about a new development
Yes.
where somebody would come in with the intention of buying 20 or 30% of the subdivision up and renting it
We're
out.
doing about 100%.
Yeah, they're doing 100%.
100%.
That's what we're seeing so
Yeah,
far.
that's-
Okay,
Yes,
so I
they're
was
buying the whole
wondering, because
thing.
there are a lot of people that go, you know, you get in a bad economy and they buy 10 or 12 houses out of foreclosure and they rent them and that's how they make a living.
That's right.
But they live here. You know, those people live here and work here. So that's not really what
Some
we're
of us
talking
have,
about.
some of us have done that, so we don't see that as the issue we're trying to prevent. It's the whole neighborhood being
Yeah,
bought.
yeah, that was a shock to me. I never really thought about somebody doing that.
See, and the way I look at it is,
Three REIT dollars. I mean, it's,
I mean,
you know.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're trying to protect the folks you're talking about as well,
Sure.
because these guys, what we're seeing, they're coming in and I think, what is it, 100 acres over in Guyton? That's already been sold and that's gonna be a build to rent. That whole development over there, right there on 17,
Wow.
yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, we didn't either.
That was an eye opener. When I heard that, that just,
Well, what folks have told us is this concept has been around for a while. It's been out west and has made its way towards the East Coast. And now it's come down, I guess, Charlotte, now Atlanta. I know Atlanta counties are experiencing a lot of it. And now it's made its way here to the Savannah area.
well, thank
I
you.
mean, rentals a house. There's a housing need for that, so it's not about that. It's keeping the balance.
I got you.
It's about protecting the quality, come on up, protecting the quality of homes built too. Usually if they build a whole 400 lots for rental, they usually don't put the quality into them. So if they ever are sold, they're not sold for what they should be. It hurts the tax digest, that hurts schools, that hurts everything. Hey,
Hi, good evening, gentlemen. My name is Jennifer Hilburn, and I work with 100 Miles. We're a nonprofit that works to preserve our coastal heritage and our natural communities. We work a lot in policy and development and planning. In fact, we worked with your staff in creating the comprehensive management planning that you just recently adopted. And I'm here tonight to speak on what we thought was going to be a conversation. Looks like it's being put off till next week on buffers. In particular, one developer or two developers who are looking to develop right up against the drinking water intake for the city of Savannah. I would ask you to recall that it's not just for the city of Savannah, but also for the city of Brinken and Springfield and Effingham County. So I would encourage you, as you go into this buffer conversation, to remember there is a reason we create these large buffers. There's a reason that you create ordinances to have these 300-foot buffers, and they're not to continually be through variance nipped and ticked and away at, and particularly with our drinking water input. I mean, we are the only area in the coast that takes our drinking water, or part of our drinking water, from surface water. So I would encourage you to be very, very careful at that particular location. I know it sounds like a small amount of wetlands that is going to be developed and mitigated. Unfortunately, those mitigation credits are bought at a bank way upstream and have nothing to do with our drinking water. I'm sure you're all familiar with that process. But this particular development, we have so much going on right now in Effingham County. This one that would impact our drinking water, it's over 1 million square footage of more warehouse development. There's one other thing that I'd like you to think about or just be aware of. I'm not sure that you are. I spend some time, unfortunately, every year going up to Atlanta and working under the Gold Dome. And right now there is a definite Georgia congressional drive and push to understand, I'm going to be careful how I phrase this, but to understand the dealings of development authorities, because there is a lot of concern in the state, most of this driven from individual counties, about development authorities and industrial authorities and the sort of swaps that are going on in the trades. And I don't have to familiarize you all with this because you know it. And many counties are feeling hamstrung that they're being brought these types of developments, and as they were already done deals, and in fact are then having to make a lot of concessions that they didn't want to make, whether that's tax write-offs not being paid for 10 years, whether that's having to change the buffers, all kinds of things. There is currently starting tomorrow a study committee in the Senate looking at development authorities, and they currently passed a bill to put them under the Ethics Commission. All of this to say that this is going to drive our development authorities and our industrial authorities and our downtown authorities to really push things through in the next, throughout this year. Now, I shouldn't need to remind you, but sometimes it's always good. I like to hear it at a girl once in a while, right? You all have the authority, the responsibility, and the representation of our community. You all can choose to say yes or say no to these things. All right, so this is really, really in your hands. And I know, like I said, I can't really share, but there is a lot of communities, there are a lot of counties in this state that are feeling very, very frustrated that they get pigeonholed is probably not an appropriate word, but pigeonholed into making these decisions. And what we're seeing with the ports and the expansion of the ports, as you all already know, you're just going to be hitting it again. So I ask you to take some time to encourage the measures that you've already adopted through comprehensive management planning and through your zoning regulations and as you're going through this process, and sort of stick by your guns, you know, making the right decision for our community. I have watched you all. It's the first time I'm introducing myself, and I have seen a lot of thoughtful conversation. Not necessarily always to exactly what I would say or I would recommend, but you do have some thoughtful conversations, so I really would ask that you continue to do so. This is going to get what we have seen in development in the last 5-10 years. This is going to be nothing compared to what the next 5-10 years looks like, and I think you're all pretty aware of that. This is our time together as a community to make these decisions, whether we're talking about rental property developments, industrial developments. I know warehouses are often thought of as the most low-impact development, but the stormwater that would occur, just the pollution through the stormwater over that type of a large industrial site into our drinking water system, I mean, that's something that really should, that's a place where we say, okay, well, here's our line and we're gonna have to stop here, okay? Our drinking water is important. There's only so much our drinking water facilities can do to keep our water clean. So thank you all for all that you do. I know you have an impossibly difficult job. It's only gonna get harder and worse, and they're gonna come at you real hard in the next few months. So please, please think of our communities first.
Yeah, these meetings are really good for us because we learn as much as we think we might know sometimes serving on the Board of Commission and hearing reports. It's always good to hear from other experts out there like yourself that can help us. So I got some questions, maybe Eric, and if you stay at the mic for a minute to help me kind of just get a grip on it, and maybe you guys have a grip. But when we're talking about protecting water source, are we talking about within, say, a 7-mile radius, if a warehouse was to go in, that's an area where you would not, we have a pretty good buffer now, require 300 undisturbed buffer. Are we talking about that's the area we hold the line and we don't shrink that buffer down? Or are we talking about that we don't have construction within a mile of the water source, period? I mean, what we're talking about buffers, and you said like drawing a line. Help me kind of understand what we're looking at that. Is it sticking with the guns on the buffers we have?
Yes.
It's not, so you're not saying that, I mean, maybe you are, I don't know. We're not saying that if this warehouse is within a mile of our water source, we should say no to it. It's just that we should not limit, we should not reduce the buffers maybe in this area for that particular warehouse.
I would say if in general, you guys have decided on a 300-foot buffer. That is the expertise of your staff, all the people that they've talked to, all the research data, et cetera, right? This is the recommendations, and you adopted it, and you have 300-foot buffers. That's all for a reason, right? That's not to change. I am not an expertise on exactly how much space you need. I think Ms. Laura would probably come up and do better on that near a drinking water intake in particular. So when I was meaning draw the line, we now know that we're sort of talking about our drinking water.
Yeah, draw
So
the
this
line
is
on
the,
the
draw the line on how much variance you'll give.
I got
Drawing
you.
the
Yeah.
line on continuing to allow
Yeah.
a little bit
Because-
more and a little bit more, excuse me.
Right, that's good. Well, you watch those polls. Because I think the buffers we have now, because we rely a lot on Georgia Soil and Water to say, all right, give us your plans and let's make sure that if you have some non-permeable surfaces, that the water doesn't leave any faster than it did before you built. So we rely a lot on that permitting process to make sure that water doesn't contaminate around. Most of the buffers, Tim, and if I'm wrong on this, just correct me, I said no problem. Both the buffers we're talking about usually are just for site of residential, commercial, protecting residents, noise, lights, and those kind of things. And those are areas that we might be looking at reducing for that, where it doesn't affect water sources. Go ahead.
And you're right on that. So when we put buffers, the buffer ordinance is primarily geared towards protecting a surrounding use, and which is why if it's 300 feet, but it's 300 feet industrial against residential. It's not 300 feet if it was industrial versus industrial, or industrial versus, it's 30 feet. Isn't it 30, is it 30 feet industrial versus business, or 100? Or, but so if it were essentially to strictly on the basis of let's say watershed protection, then they'd all be the same regardless of what the surrounding use is, because that watershed protection is constant. It doesn't care what this
Right,
property's
whether
use is
it's
or this
commercial,
property's use is.
residential, it doesn't get it.
However, we do have a section in our code with regards to water source protection, and it does. I think it's somewhere between 100 and 150 feet, if I remember it correctly. That it recommends between that and our water source, or water source and so on and so forth. But that's to the stream bank effectively in this case.
Yeah, it is 150 feet, I believe, and if I remember correctly, I work in 3 counties, so forgive me, but I believe it's 150 feet, and that is to a water source. That does not take into consideration that source is where the drinking water is being pulled from. That comes, your source then is basically the Savannah River, Abercorn Creek to the Savannah River, without consideration that just happens to be the location where you're pulling your drinking water. That's thinking of the Savannah River as this whole body of water that can accept a lot of these pollutants and,
Right, they're
so
looking
on
at the
and so-
phosphorus, the OD, everything is.
Absolutely,
yeah.
exactly.
So that's good comments tonight. So that's something we can look at as we continue to do our buffers to see if around the water source, if there's anything we need to
Sure.
strengthen there to protect. Yes, that's why we have these meetings, to learn things we don't know. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Help us grow a healthier county.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Rita Elliott, and it's lovely to see you all again, although I didn't really expect to be here tonight. And I kind of wish I don't have to see y'all so quickly. I mean, I appreciate the movements you're making towards revising the codes for the master plan, and that's imperative. But I actually came to the meeting for another reason tonight, but it's kind of all interwoven, so I don't know where to start because I got scribbles all over here. But first of all, I want to thank you very much for putting number 7 on your list of green space. And I truly trust that's not just going to be a line item on a list, that you're actually going to follow through on that in lots of different ways. So I appreciate that, and I thank you.
I tell you, to give you some assurance, I think what we've been talking about, there's comfortable ways to control growth, where you get more quality growth, and I think that's one way that's safe legally to control quality growth. When you determine trees you have to leave and green space you have to have, it makes cheaper construction a little more difficult.
Yeah, that's a
I don't know if I
very
should
good
say that in
point.
public, but I think that's part of what we're making sure we have better quality growth.
Definitely, I totally agree with that, and it makes everybody more comfortable too.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
Definitely. I did want to say quickly, I'm not sure I understood why you lumped agricultural land and conservation lands together in your slideshow, because they're two totally, it's like putting, categorizing.
I didn't. They were separate. I was just saying that if you look at developed and undeveloped property, that if you add them together, agricultural and conservation account for for 10 times as much as residential, industrial, and commercial.
Yeah, it kind of presents a false dichotomy though, because it's like putting oranges and water buffalo together, because agricultural might not be developed, but it's certainly not green space by any means. So, you know,
That's
to
right.
say.
I think it,
Well,
it
no,
does show how much land is out there that is undeveloped.
Ripe for
that is-
destruction,
that
true, that's true.
Could,
yeah.
it could become developed and, you know.
And I'll just agree with that, and because some of the green space programs that other jurisdictions, and I slip of the tongue, I mentioned Charleston a few times because that's where I came from. When they talk about protecting green space, they're talking about protecting development rights on agricultural property. So they view that protecting agricultural property is preserving green space as well. So it's how you implement a
How
green
you-
space protection plan,
How you define green face, I would
and
say.
how you define it.
Yeah.
And in many cases, just simply protecting even agricultural farmland from development is some view as preservation of green space. So.
It's preservation of property, I would say.
For public use, is your thoughts? Or
No,
not?
no, just, okay, so you've got agricultural, 10 acres of agriculture and 10 acres of green space. Your agriculture, you're putting pesticides, all sorts of things into that property that's running off into the rivers and creeks. You know, it's a homogeneous landscape. You don't have this mixed nature and all this different ecosystems. So it's totally different things. I'm not saying, we need agriculture. You know, I like to eat. We need food, so I'm not arguing against that. I'm just saying they're not the same thing by any means. And then I was just looking at the slideshow with the SME proposed code changes. And so without reading it, I'm just speaking off the cuff, but is there anything about green space in that thing? You know, requiring things like what the cornices and the shutters have to look like, little bitty minute details, but do we not care about?
Yeah, let Tim address that. We've already done some work on that.
Okay,
but
I might
we'll-
just not.
And some of that's already in the existing code. Matter of fact, with the work that SNME has done for us on that, and with this board, and when we did this out of order, that's one thing that the board wanted to protect, which is to say that you're going to have certain amount of green space, and of that, you're going to have a certain amount of usable green space, which is recreation space as well, and that's in the current R6 and R3 zoning.
That we have now?
Yeah, that we have now.
Yeah, that's a
I'm
change.
not seeing that.
Well, it's a
Well,
change
no,
from we
because
had
it's
about a
just
year
recently
ago.
passed.
Because
Oh, okay.
they used to, they could have wetlands as part of their green space, and we've eliminated that for the most part. They use like but a small percentage. But
Yeah.
They gotta have more upland green space now that's actually true.
Green space, usable green space.
Usable
that
green space for
children could have a playground
walking,
or.
children playing, trees.
Their retention pond doesn't count.
Retention ponds don't count anymore.
Nice, that's good.
Well, they do 50%, isn't it? Or there's a
No,
there's a
it's like
formula.
Only if the kids can swim in them, right?
Retention ponds,
Maybe they, yeah.
You have to have active recreational green space, and then you can have passive, which
Yeah.
we allow a certain percentage of the wetlands in the
That's right,
ponds.
that's what I
but it's a lot
Be
smaller than it
passive,
was a year ago.
Yes.
It's a lot smaller. So we're still looking at that. We want to do something fairly quickly because we saw this multifamily and developments and people were not. So if you've been to any of these meetings recently, you'll see they'll say, and this is where we're going to have the pavilion, and this is where we're going to have the trees, and the kids can play, and this is where we have a
Okay.
playground
Well,
and
that's a
stuff.
move, that's definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to see a little more cohesiveness, like on the perimeter, fringe perimeters of developments, and then connectors between the developments of green space instead of like, you know, a
And that-
tree
and
and a
that's part of
pavilion.
the study we're doing. We just did some Band-Aids.
Sure, that's
trying to-
great.
Trying to put some brakes on
Right,
some
yeah.
things really
Well,
quick.
y'all are moving in the right direction. I
Yeah.
applaud that, and maybe it can be even better, so that'd be great.
We're gonna keep these meetings so you can you can track us and see if we're really doing it or not.
I had it, yeah, well, anyway, okay, yeah, okay, so, we're talking about buffers and everything, and, buffers are great, I think, for all sorts of reasons, but, I mean, the definition of a buffer is like a berm in flat Effingham County, a berm, is that the best we can do for a buffer?
Yeah, and let me tell you where this comes into. And so when you look at the buffer as what their primary purpose is in our ordinance was to protect the neighboring property.
Protect it from sound or from what?
That's one thing, from sound and from light. It's a visual buffer.
Ooh, how tall are
It's
these
a-
berms?
It's an auditory buffer. And so in some cases, when given the option of saying you could have essentially a field with plantings that meet certain requirements for buffer, or you can have a or we can put a, 20-foot berm on there to protect, to create that delineation between the two different uses. That when you're talking about particularly an industrial use going next to a residential property, which happens periodically, then a berm might be a more protective option with regards to visible buffer and sound buffer, versus simply a field with, some shrubs that have to fill in over time. So that's one of the things we're trying to figure out, if we can create some sort of formula for a developer to go by. Obviously, berms are a lot more expensive. And so we want to take that into consideration. And so when we kind of come up with a recommendation, we're looking at what best protects the neighboring property.
Yeah, wouldn't it be nice to have some sort of thing that not only protected, but provided some kind of environmental benefit as well, and social benefit too? If you had, these corridors that had trees that would block the light and, some of the sound, and native plantings, and, a trail among them, then it's not just a berm like an Egyptian pyramid in the middle of nowhere, but it's got connectivity, and it also provides, buffers and sound protection and light protection, and it's a comfortable space, and it's not, office park shrubs that have to be pruned every 3 weeks or whatever. Just some thoughts.
Yeah, and so we define buffer as undisturbed, but we also know what happens is that prior to a rezoning, someone might clear cut a property, and then they'll come in and do a rezoning, and undisturbed now is a vacant field, where we have to have them go in there and plant stuff, and so, or if it has not been disturbed prior to rezoning, then it has to stay as it is with the existing trees and so on and
That's
so forth in
great,
there.
yeah.
So they can't go in there, clear it out, and then plant whatever they want,
Yes,
or
yeah.
harvest the timber. It has to be undisturbed.
That's great. That's real good. Okay. So real quick, I know everybody wants to go home, but, so I do echo Ms. Walker's statements. I've never met her before, but she made some really good statements. Clean drinking water, you said on your slideshow, we get 5.5 million gallons a day from the Savannah intake. And the developers are talking about reducing that 300-foot buffer, which isn't even big enough to begin with, down to 1/12 of that. That's not going to keep our drinking water clean. Yeah, and then, so I think all this goes back to codes, obviously, but also the consideration of not just this little piecemeal, okay, is this warehouse, and they're cutting through this little part of the wetlands, okay, it's only 15 or 20 acres, that's no big deal. But if you get that over and over again, how many of these 7 million square feet of warehousing they're expecting to need in the next 10 or 20 years is going to be pushed into Effingham County? So you take, 20 acres of wetlands here, 100 there, pretty soon you have none left. And pretty soon everything's polluted. These concrete parking lots are feeding all these pollutants into the creeks and the rivers, and not to mention the traffic and the pollution from the trucks. So I think really what it boils down to is the cumulative effects of everything you consider. So, when you have a variance after variance after variance, they're not a variance anymore. That's just the way business is being done. And I know y'all are working on trying to make the codes so you don't have to have these variances. But if you could write the codes to consider cumulative effects, whether it's cumulative effects of buffers, if it's cumulative effects of how much wetlands can we stand to be destroyed, I think that would be huge and be going in the right direction. I think that was it. Seems like there's something. Oh, the Atlas Reservoir, that's great. That's a good thing. And I think more of that would be wonderful. So yeah, just please, I urge you to think holistically about everything you do and the cumulative effects of
Certainly,
everything.
these are good comments, and as we'll relook at our buffers, not just from light, sound, traffic, and those kind of things. We'll look at it from particularly around our reservoir, so.
Yeah, well, and everywhere. I mean, why does a buffer have to be a stupid pile of sand? Why can't it be something that's beneficial to the environment and to people? It just makes sense. Also, less maintenance. If you put office park kraut there, you're gonna have to water it all the time and trim it all the time. If you put native plants there, less work. It's cheaper. It's better. So, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments.
I debated on whether to stand up here and say anything or not. I'm sure you're tired of hearing about the water intake.
I think most people know you, but just for the record, you state your name.
My name is John Sawyer. I am an Effingham County resident, been a resident for 25 years. I also have somewhat of a unique set of skills and knowledge with the water system. I managed and ran, operated the I&D and the city, in the water system for the city of Savannah for 30 years. So I'm pretty well versed in it. And I understand your need for, your ordinances that can apply everywhere and apply the same to everybody. You gotta treat everybody fair. I understand. I've done this for a long time. But your intake, that intake is different. If you put in buffers, and I'm gonna say this, and somebody might hit me in the head as I go out. I understand if you flooded a neighbor, that's terrible. But that can be dealt with. If noise is a problem, that's terrible. I get it, but that can be dealt with. If you contaminate your water supply, you can't overcome that. And it's not limited to that neighbor. The water that comes in, and it doesn't, I even get it if 30 years ago, all that water went to somewhere in Savannah or Chatham County. Okay, you could say, hey, that's their problem. Today, that is not the case. Contaminating that water supply is your problem. You would be creating your own problem. It would be like building an outhouse right next to your well. That's not a smart thing. Now, how do you go about it? What are the buffers? How far? I don't know that I have the answer to that today. I have seen some development plans, and I'm sure they're just plans, but as I was talking with Chairman as we came in this afternoon, I have seen the development that is planned for over behind, and I don't remember the name, it's the extension of Goshen Road, whatever the name of that is. And yes, you have supposedly no more runoff leaving than was running off before. The volume doesn't matter. The problem is the water quality. It's all coming together. If you look at that plan, there's lots of ponds out there, and I'm not throwing rocks at anybody. I'm just pointing out what's there. There's lots of retention ponds, but they all come together, at least on the plan I saw, and they go through one line, so there is one point for all of the water that leaves that site to go through one line to Old Augusta Road. That's about 16, 17, 1,800 feet, somewhere in there. You're only about 3,500 feet from Old Augusta Road to the intake. So if there's something spilled in one of those parking lots,
Is it above the intake?
it doesn't make any difference because that's tidal. So half the day, water flows toward the ocean, half the day, water flows toward Bear Creek or Ebenezer. It flows each way.
At the intake, I don't know that water, because I get in that river all the time. I don't know that water goes back up in the freshwater this way.
Yes, sir. That tide goes both ways.
Every time I get in it, it goes,
Yeah, it is tidal though.
I've been around it 30 years. It goes both ways.
Isn't that on Georgia Power property up
What?
there near Plant McIntosh?
yeah,
What?
it's close.
The intake?
Yeah.
No.
No, sir. It's right next to
Abercorn Creek.
Abercorn Landing.
Just south of Abercorn Landing.
The tide does affect it, cause like at Mom and Dad's River House on the Savannah River, if you hang out there all day, you can look on the limbs on the side, and it'll move about 6 inches.
right there at the intake is about a
it
6-foot
was
tide
more.
swing.
But that's something I'd like to research and see what the tidal effect is, because I know that as the tide comes, it may go down, but is it just, it's going this fast earlier and later it's going this fast?
No, sir. It's about a 6-foot tide swing right there at the intakes.
Okay. Word for it, but
I'm just saying, and I'm not throwing any rock. I've done it.
Yeah, I mean, there was a tritium leak. I mean, I worked for the power company. We used to get slugs of water there was problems with when that would change our water quality out there.
So before we fixed the Abercorn Creek boat ramp, the old guys would complain to me that you couldn't put your boat in at low tide because it made that much of a difference there.
About 6 feet, yeah.
Yeah.
And if you get the nor'easters, it can be 8 feet. So it is a huge tide swing. But my point being that even though
all
this
that
is,
pollution from Savannah's Industries is going right into that intake? How are they handling that?
that doesn't hardly make it up that far.
Okay.
You're about a mile from the intake to where Abercorn dumps into the Savannah River, and about another half mile to I-95.
Yeah.
So when I say it doesn't make it that far, I'm sure there's some things that get in there and make it that far.
Sure, I would think it would flow faster a mile in the water than it would 3,500 feet in the dirt.
Probably so. But let me say that I no longer work for Savannah. I am retired. I'm not here getting paid by Savannah. I'm here because I'm a resident of the county and I happen to know how this whole thing works. And so I'm only saying this so that when you look at your plans, take into account that is a very special place. It is your drinking, and it's your drinking water source, just like it is Savannah's. And with the cutbacks and groundwater that's coming in 2025, you're going to be all the more reliant on it.
Well, we're looking at that. We won't be all the more reliant on it, I can assure you.
Okay.
Yeah. But we still want to protect it.
Okay. I'm just,
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean,
It's a good point.
I'm interested still seeing all these.
Yeah, I want to see the studies, because I do want to protect
pollution
it. I don't want to
points.
pollute it by any means. But there's a lot of moving parts to this we've got to look at. That's why we do these
And
meetings.
we'll have
Absolutely.
the property owner there to, we've got to find a way to tell them that you're looked at different than this other property owner on the other side of the county, or, and they had no control whether Savannah I&D took their intake there. So it's just, there's a lot of moving parts there.
I get it, and you don't have to explain to me. I'm just telling if that gets contaminated, it's your water.
I mean, it could get contaminated further up the river too.
Absolutely. In fact, the city for 25 years, I started it when I got there, there are 7 spots up Abercorn Creek, Bear Creek, all the way up to Ebenezer, where basically you have the confluence and the water. That's where the tidal influence ends, is right up there. We go up there every quarter. I say we, Savannah, and I confirmed today they still do, but every quarter they go up there and they take samples where Swigoffer Creek comes in, where Dasher Creek comes in, up at Ebenezer. But there's 7 spots, and we check those strictly for water quality. And we run them through everything that is regulated for drinking water, so we can keep an eye on what happened, what is going on. What we don't want to have happen is somebody having a problem on up, say, Dasher Creek that nobody knows about, and it's running down Dasher Creek and then down into the intake. So they're checking it constant. There has been a huge effort by Savannah to keep tabs on it.
But we even
because
have
it
to
is-
do our water quality. We spend, what, 40,000 or something a year before they check for the quality in our creeks and our runoffs and all? Am I correct?
Yeah, we have a watershed protection plan. We check downstream of our plant. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
The sewer plant.
Yes, sir.
I thought we did water quality for our whole county. I know the cities have to do it too. There's something that we do to check the the quality of the creeks and so forth, that they have to do it during a dry season, wet season. That's not just related to the treatment facility.
It's our watershed protection plan, and there's multiple locations. It's 7 or 8 sites, and they're throughout the southern half of the county, because the gradient of surface water, if there was a leak at the wastewater plant or in the sewer system, it would reach these points.
I thought it was
We got
also
spots
checking like
along Goshen
fertilizer
and
runoff
along-
and insecticide runoff, and it's checking all that, isn't it? I thought it was,
Sorry.
I thought it was also looking at the runoff water that comes from insecticides and fertilizer and all those things that run into the creeks. We have to,
Well, we have, the MS4 program doesn't have a summer winter wet, dry sampling schedule, but there is a monitoring program associated with the urban runoff from our MS4 area. But I think what Mr. Sawyer's referring to, and you're referring to, is our watershed protection plan associated with the downstream of the wastewater plant. And the different tributaries that it feeds into. If there were a surface, if there was a leak and a surface runoff made its way to a defined channel, we got locations along 30, Goshen, Hodgeville that we check and sample on a quarterly basis.
So the intake is a mile from Abercorn Creek?
The intake is on Abercorn Creek, but it is approximately a mile up from where Abercorn Creek would typically dump in, or the downstream end of Abercorn where it goes into the river. So if you go upriver from 95, about a half a mile, Abercorn Creek takes off, and you're about a mile to the actual intake.
I'm trying to think of the refuge is right there. There's another group of hunting properties, about 1,200 acres, and there's the power company. It's on one of those parcels, I believe. Is it the refuge property?
What, the intake?
Yeah.
It's on,
Whose property is it?
the city of Savannah owns
Do
it.
you know where the Abercorn landing is?
Yeah.
So if rather than going straight into the landing, you just continue down the road, it's maybe like 500 yards
Yes.
down the road is where it
when you
is.
put in the Abercorn Landing and you're going in your boat down that
And
way.
you go to the main channel, it's
Isn't that the
on your
first,
right,
isn't
not
that the
far.
first intake on the right, but it's less than.
Yeah, you can see it. I mean,
can
obviously,
see it
right
from
from
the
the landing.
landing.
Yeah, I go by it all the time, yeah.
Yeah, if you go to the end of that road, rather than turn off on the landing, you'll run into the gates.
Put your boat in right there and go down, I want to say it's just like 300 or 400 yards.
You can
Not that
throw a
far.
rock, it ain't far.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right there.
But
I'm
if,
not, I'm not saying I don't agree, or I just, we gotta be data driven to, to look at this, and it sounds like the data's there.
Yeah, we'll be looking, it's good, this is information, y'all have helped us to add more than just sight, sound and stuff. We're gonna look at that and get data as we look at these buffers and what we do, and the areas we might wanna restrict. So it's been good.
well, if I can help, you know how to contact me.
I thought I recognized when I walked in.
I'm just, I'm now retired, so if I can help with whatever, just let
Sounds
me
good,
know.
appreciate it,
But
John.
that is a unique place.
Yeah, we love that part of the river. We love to put in out there and ride it, so we don't wanna contaminate it for sure. How about from my builder over there? You got any, our architect, you got any comments or anything you heard, anything we need to, you can advise us as we need to, we're gonna have more of these meetings. We're just really looking for input that you guys are giving us. So we're gonna get back together in a couple of months probably and see where we're at. Growing too fast not to talk more often. Okay, anything from the Board of Commissions?
Don't have anything.
All right, I'm gonna thank you for coming tonight. Look for the next one that we'll have. Hopefully, we'll have some of our studies completed by then, and we can really dig into those and let you help us look at what we missed on that. And so I appreciate everybody who's been here tonight and participated. This is just a work session, so I don't think we need a motion to adjourn. I'll just adjourn us.
Yeah, we never took a, yeah.
We'll stand in adjournment.